It's the big one. These are the 10 best books I read in 2025. Now, they come with a couple of caveats. I have read books that I would rate highly throughout the year that are not on this list, but that's because they are rereads rather than just being books that I read for the very first time in 2025. There are books on here that didn't come out in 2025. So if that's the list you're looking for, this is not the right one. But I can tell you now, these are all books that I absolutely loved in 2025. I drink every time I say 2025. So let's get into them. As I said, there are 10. I'm not going to be doing them in any sort of order because I did think about doing them in an order and then I tried to put them in an order and I think I couldn't put one in an order. So they're not in an order, but they're all here. I've got the physical copies of them because I thought to myself, I think I've started lending out books and I've started reading on Kobo and all sorts of stuff. But these are the 10 best books I've read all year. Also, I know some people may be saying, oh, but the year hasn't finished yet. I can't imagine there's going to be a book that's going to break into this top 10. And if it does, I'll just feature it next year's maybe, or I'll just do its own special little video where I was like, I made a mistake, I should have put that in my top 10. Either way, let's get into it because as always, I'm random. So my first book is The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Now this is a classic and I am somebody who likes to pick up the odd classic because I think to myself, to be a true reader, I need to have read X books. I need to have read this book and that book to understand true literature and see why it stood the test of time. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is one of those books. It's the sequel to The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, both of which were published in like the early to mid 1800s, so expect to have some very different ideologies in here and some different cultures to what we're used to today. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn focuses on Huckleberry Finn, but also Jim, who is a black slave in the little town, I guess, he comes from, and how they end up inadvertently going on an adventure together and their relationship with one another and the things they get on with each other and their time apart and what that means for them and all this sort of stuff. And I loved it. Now, it's very difficult when you read a book like this that is set so long ago to kind of be able to culturally understand a lot of the things that are going on, but I think if you've got any sort of historical knowledge, you'd understand the differences that happen in here. So the big topics in this book are slavery. There's a lot of Huckleberry's kind of naivety as to why black people are in slavery, that sort of thing. And that's a big part of the book. And just the relationship between Huckleberry Finn and Jim, and how because of Huckleberry's Finn, he doesn't see the colour of Jim's skin, he simply sees a human being and this sort of thing. And it's a lovely, lovely book. And as I said, even though written 150, 200 years ago, 150 probably closer years ago, it feels like it could have been written today in terms of its maturity and its understanding and its knowledge of the differences in race during that period. So I ended up absolutely loving this one and didn't think I would because I didn't know what it was about. The one caveat and the one thing I always mention when I talk about this book is it's written in a very specific way. It's written with the dialect, literal dialect of the very local Southern American twangs. Thus, when you're reading it, I use the word thus in a video, thus when you're reading it, it is quite difficult to pick up what is being said, what the words mean, that sort of thing. So if you don't quite know what I mean, if you've read Harry Potter and you've read Hagrid and how some of his kind of sentences are written in such a way that you can understand he's got an accent, that happens throughout the whole book. That's the entire book. So if you do struggle with that and you want to pick this up, I would recommend maybe picking up an audiobook because then the audiobook narrator knows the words and knows how they should be properly pronounced. So that would help. This was Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. That's the first book of 10 on the best books of 2025 for me, Luke. In a completely different genre, we have The Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. Now, this is a prequel to The Hunger Games. If you know nothing about this, this is basically Haymitch's story. Now, I did read the other prequel to Hunger Games, which was just very, very average. This was very, very good. This is exactly what I wanted. This had enough of the, okay, we know where we are in terms of the timeline. It had enough references to the original trilogy, which in theory, if you're doing a prequel, people want to feel like they are still part of that original trilogy. They're just a little bit before it. The other book didn't feel like that and I had no idea why it existed. This story is brilliant. Haymitch's character, as he is throughout the trilogy, the original trilogy, is brilliant. He's got a big outspoken personality. He, has a lot of opinions. He's quite humorous. He doesn't take life too seriously. And it kind of progresses his downfall. Now, without spoiling too much of it, and if you've not read the original trilogy, some of this may be spoilers, but it kind of catalogues his downfall into where we see him in the original trilogy. It marks his Hunger Games, which I can't remember which Hunger Games it is, but he was part of an important Hunger Hunger Games, and it marks how he, you know, goes on and does all of the things in that. I've said that really poorly, but I think I'm trying to not spoil it, but at the same time I presume everybody knows what happens in this book. As I said, the other prequel was not great because I just didn't feel anything. I didn't really care about the characters. Haymitch you do care about because you care about him in the original trilogy, and Suzanne Collins has written him really well in this one as well. So I was really, really impressed. Enjoyed a lot of it. What I think impressed me most of and surprised me most of all when it came to a lot of it was just how much I did enjoy it. Now I said I enjoyed it, and just how much I did enjoy it. It was a very light-hearted book. It was a book where if you have, as I said, read the original trilogy, it's something you will really much enjoy. There's lots of lore in here that you can pick up. There's lots of that kind of prequel, oh, that's X's father or mother or ancestor, or that's why this happens in the original trilogy, and that's how this comes about, and that's why that lore is in place, and that's where that person comes from, and oh look, there's a reference to this person here that we all know. It's that sort of thing where you're like, And yes, it may be a little bit of fanfare. Would I have enjoyed this book if I'd never read the original trilogy, and never understood anything about the Hunger Games? I don't know. Would I have enjoyed it as much? I don't know. But I did enjoy it. And thus, that's why it's in my top 10 books I read in 2025. And if you're worried about reading either of the prequels, I would highly recommend this one over the other one, because it's just the better prequel. The other one you could miss and wouldn't mean anything. You wouldn't miss out on anything. It's, yeah, waste of time. But this one, very, very good. And if you're a big fan of the original trilogy, even if you're just a minor fan, if you're just like, you know of it and have heard of the story, this is a good fun. So we've done classic, we've done kind of YA fantasy, and now we're into adult fantasy, and that's The Lies of Locke, Lamora by Scott Lynch. Now, with this is a book that I read so long ago, or so early on in the year, that I forgot I read it this year, but I went through my story graph and looked up my highly rated books of the year, and this featured, so I thought, well, this needs now to be in my top 10. The Lies of Locke, Lamora by Scott Lynch is a book that I think if you pretty much go to any kind of top 10, 15 fantasy books of all time, this will likely feature. I don't know about the sequels, and I don't know about the rest of the books. I never see those as like a best series. I just see this singular books. I don't know. But this was brilliant. Really, really fantastic. It follows the story of Locke Lamora, who is a thief. It follows kind of in tandem his two different stories. His story growing up and how he gets into this kind of thieves guild that he's in, who are called the Gentleman Bastards. And then a modern day telling of a story where he's kind of trying to break in and overthrow people, and I don't want to spoil the story, but both are brilliant. Now, there's two things I really liked about this book. One is the humor. There's very dark humor. This is called grim dark. If you don't know what grim dark is, it basically means it's bloody. There's kind of dark humor that some people may not find funny, and there's a lot of characters that are a bit grim and that sort of stuff. It's that kind of gritty fantasy rather than being, I don't know, high fantasy where everyone's like beautiful elves and everything's quite light and fluffy. This is very grim, dark. The only thing that's fancy about it is there's a kind of a magic system and this sort of thing. In fact, there's very little that's fancy about this, but it is considered fancy. It is good fun, and that's why I enjoyed it. And a lot of books, actually, that I have on this list, I wouldn't necessarily say are the best books I've ever read in terms of their writing, in terms of their story flow, in terms of their character building, but they're books that I came out of and I thought I just really, really enjoyed that. And sometimes you come into those books and it's just the perfect time to have read it, and I feel like Lies of Locke Lamora was the perfect time for me to have read that. It was just a really, really fun book. The story is brilliant. I think I preferred the kind of story of him growing up and getting into this thieves guild and his relationship with the thieves that are now in the guild, as it were, and how he built that relationship and how some of them broke down and how he became a leader and all this sort of stuff. So that was really fun. So if you've been on the kind of tenterhooks as to whether you actually want to pick this up or not, you've seen it about and you think, is it going to be for me? Give it a go. It's not the longest of books. We're talking about 500-page fantasy, so we're not looking at a 1,000-page fantasy where you need to commit your entire life to it. So I'd highly recommend it. So that's The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. And then we go into something completely different once again. This is essentially a sci-fi novella called This Is How You Lose the Time War by two people, Amal El Mokhtar and Max Gladstone, who both wrote it together. It's conversation, or it's a almost poem, or it's a story, I don't know how you kind of want to talk about it, between two characters, Red and Blue. And they exist in two kind of different times, but they are fighting in the same war. Thus, they have conversations about, oh, you might be about to experience this, or if you're living in the past, do you remember this, or this sort of thing. But basically, they're having conversations with one another, and it's a romance, and it's how they want to kind of meet up, and they don't know how they can meet up or where they're going to meet up, and there is heartbreak, and there is heartwarming moments, and there are big grand moments, and there's just these really beautifully written conversations between the pair of them. Now, I don't know how Amal and Max broke up the conversations, whether one of them wrote as Red and one of them wrote as Blue, I don't know. Either way, it was fantastic, and it really surprised me because novellas are not my thing. I struggle with novellas because I struggle to actually get into the full story. It doesn't build enough for me. I don't have enough time to get into it, and thus I struggle. But this was done in such a way where it doesn't matter how much of the world you're involved in, because the writing, the relationship between the two characters was so good that it was still worth all of your time getting involved in. So if you've seen this about and you think it's short, I'm not a novella fan, or you think it just sounds a bit like some sort of corny romance poem, it's not. I'm not a romance person. I find romance in books always overly forced and overly pushed and never that natural. It doesn't feel like a real romance. It feels like some sort of Christmas card or Christmas movie where it's forced and they're not actually that great for each other. It's just forced because they're both good looking, that sort of thing. This is not that. This is purely based on conversations between people and they don't know what they look like. This was an absolute banger. Loved it so much. It's short, sweet. As I said, it's a novella. We're talking a book here that is less than 200 pages. So yeah, This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mokhtar and Max Gladstone. Another fancy is The Ferryman. Now this one's a little bit interesting. This is by Justin Cronin. This was one of my book picks of the month. I think This Is How You Lose the Time War was as well. So I had 12 books I wanted to read in 2025 and I've not yet read one, so that may be one of the books that I think, oh, I should have been on this list. Either way, this book was one of those. Anyway, The Ferryman by Justin Cronin is a really interesting story where we're set in kind of like this alternative world where everybody has these very strict jobs and everybody lives on this island, and this guy we're following is a ferryman and everybody knows what they're doing. One day he gets involved in an encounter because of personal reasons and is fired from his job, but is confused as to the reason that he's fired for his job and then gets embroiled in something much bigger than he thought could ever have existed, and it was cool. Now, the first kind of third of this book, I was like, where is this going? I don't quite get it. Is that it? And then it's not it, and it basically drops off a cliff and completely flips itself upside down and goes, okay, no, there's this whole thing going on that you didn't really even think was going to be going on. And it was so good and so fun. You then do get a little bit of kind of, okay, we've done the big thing now. Now we need to muddle around and find out how to kind of finish that off. But I think it does it well, and it was a good fun to read. So this is one of my favorite books of the year. It would probably be down the lower end if I had to rank these, just because I don't think it was mind-blowing. I was just really impressed by the twist. I'm really difficult at this point to manage to get a twist out of, to manage to surprise me with a twist, because I've read so many different books with so many different twists. I'm always thinking, okay, what is it? But I wasn't expecting a twist here. And then suddenly it was like, okay, there's this thing that's just happened. It was really, really cool. It's kind of a conspiracy theory. Not everything's as you think it is sort of thing going on. So I'll try not to spoil it too much more, but it is really interesting. It is a little long, again, where we're talking about 500 pages. So if you're looking for a shorter read, this might not be what you're looking for. And as I said, there is a bit of a slow build up, but there is a lot of intrigue behind it. And there is this kind of unique, slightly unique, off-kilter world that you're kind of learning about. So yeah, definitely worth your time, an interesting read. So that's The Ferryman by Justin Cronin. The next book is The Killer Question by Janice Hallett. I guess I'll hold it that way because this is a proof copy of the book. I did receive the final copy, but I did a giveaway over on my social media channels. But The Killer Question by Janice Hallett, if you've ever kind of heard me talk about Janice Hallett before, you know she's one of my favorite authors. The way that she writes her book is really intriguing. If you're new here and you've never heard me talk about Janice Hallett's books, again, I don't know why I've said that twice, drink. Then basically the reason that I love them is that they are written in a really unique format. They are written in such a way where you are basically reading text messages or emails or correspondence between the characters rather than reading paragraphs. Thus, the plot kind of develops in a very unique way in that you almost as the reader are working out what's going on and kind of putting things together, and it's really clever. I don't know how she does it. I imagine a lot of it is, I want to tell this story, I want to have these characters involved, I want it to be told in this way, and then just to fill gaps in where maybe things were slightly too vague or not kind of obvious enough. But either way, it's really, really impressive. As I say with a lot of Janice Hallett's books, what makes these even more impressive and what is then quite clever about the books is because the things are written in kind of text and email and correspondence between people, the ability to put in personality into the characters is so much easier. So The Killer Question specifically focuses on these pub teams, and basically there is this one pub team and regular pub goers, there's these teams that always go, and they're kind of like rule the roost every time, and then a new pub team rocks up one day and starts ruling the roost and they're not happy about it, and then there's a murder, and then there's all these conversations about where this new pub team came from, and they're involved in the murder. Why would they be involved in the murder? Maybe they're not involved in the murder, but maybe there's something bigger going on here. Who knows? Either way, it's all such fun. It's one of those books where plot, yes, fantastic. Unique, interesting, exclusive way of looking at a book, yes, interesting. Characters, yes, interesting. Brilliant twist at the end, yes, interesting. really just fun to read. Yes, fantastic. So it's like 5/5 out of the whole kind of way there. And that's why I enjoy all of Janice Hallett's books. So if you've not yet picked one up, she has got a good kind of collection going on here. It starts with The Appeal. You've got the Twyford Code. I'm looking at them down here. You've got the Alberton Angels. You've got the Christmas Appeal. She's got a new one coming out called The Silent Appeal. I know I've got one here called The Examiner. So she's got enough for you to be getting on with. And they're all in the same kind of theme. They're not kind of sequential. The only one is The Appeal and the Christmas Appeal. I know that The Silent Appeal is going to be a sequel to The Appeal and all this sort of stuff. So other than that, there's nothing big that you need to know about. But The Killer Question by Janice Hallett is most definitely one of my favourite books of the year. It's just so fun, and I don't think I'll ever read a Janice Hallett book that I don't enjoy, just because I enjoy the way they're written, even if I don't think they're fantastic books, which they also are. This next book is a book that genuinely surprised me. It was a book that was really, really kindly sent to me. It's Night Road by Kristin Hannah. It was sent to me, as I said, by the publisher. I've heard of Kristin Hannah, and she does actually, she's going to feature again in this list because I just think she may well be my favourite author at the moment. Everything I've read by her is absolutely fantastic. Night Road is one of the books that Kristin Hannah released arguably before she blew up into what she is now, where almost every release she releases is considered like the best book of the month. The Night Road came out beforehand, and it's slightly different to a lot of her other stuff. A lot of her other stuff is kind of historical fiction, where we focus on a powerful woman who wasn't recognised during a famous historical event, that sort of thing. This isn't like that at all. This focuses on 3 teenagers going through school, and 2 of them are twins and their mother. That's basically the entire story, and basically how they grow up together. And then about halfway through the book, a big massive event happens and it completely changes everything. We go from this kind of fun coming of age story into this very much dark adult story where we're talking about treachery and betrayal and things becoming very hard and mental health issues and all that sort of stuff. And it was such a fantastic book. Some people say to me, like, what made you think, okay, this is one of the best books you've read all year? It's simply, I kept having to pick it up. I was so desperate to get the audiobook back into my ears. When I got home, I was so desperate to pick the physical book up again. One of those books that I could not put down, and that very rarely happens to me. I am a reader, but I'm a reader of leisure. I'm not a reader of kind of passion, or a reader that, as I said, loves to just jump and get into another book. So really, really rare that that's done that for me. And as I said, the characters that Kristin Hannah manages to write are fantastic. Every single one of her books, I fall in love with at least 2, if not 3 of the characters, thinking, I really want good things for you. That happens in here as well. They're really complexly written. She doesn't just write kind of basic characters where you're like, I know what they're going to do every single time. They're very basic. She writes difficult characters as well, where you think you're just not a great person a lot of the time, and that's a very difficult thing to write because it's not evil, it's just not a great person. So yeah, all of that's in here. I was really, really shocked by it. Stunning front cover as well. If you've not seen that front cover, it really, really is impressive. This was a re-release of something she wrote a while ago, so this is kind of like a new front cover. I would highly recommend. It's kind of easy to read, so if you're looking for something slightly easy to read, it's not quite like her newer stuff that is a little bit more mature, I would say, but it's great. It's fantastic. Highly, highly recommend. So that's Night Road by Kristin Hannah. So we may as well jump into the next Kristin Hannah, and I would say if I had to pick what my #1 book of the year was, I would possibly say it was this, and that's The Women by Kristin Hannah. This focuses on Frankie, who is a woman during the Vietnam War. She comes from a family that are very proud of their country and very kind of war proud, and, you know, very proud of their family members who have gone off to war and fought for the war. So Frankie decides that she wants to be involved in the war, and then her family are like, but you're a woman, you can't be. This is Vietnam, only men go to war. And it's the story of women being involved in the Vietnam War as nurses, and then coming back and not being recognised by all these PTSD groups and by recognised by people that need support, that sort of thing. But also at the same time, it's the relationship between Frankie and her parents, especially her father and her mother, who have slightly different ways of dealing with the way that she's gone to war. Her father is purely angry and feels betrayed and scared, and her mother is supporting her father in that sense, but thus creates this kind of big barrier between her and her daughter, which is really one of the best things about the book, I think. The conversation between those two, and how you can see her mother desperately wants her to know that she loves her, but also desperately wants her to be able to support her own husband. I don't know, it's very, very impressively done and very, very gripping, and similar to The Night Road. I could not put this down. I could not stop myself from reading this all the time. It was so, so good, so engaging, fantastic characters, a plot that just didn't waste a word ever. There was no point where I thought, well, that was a slow chapter. Every point in this every chapter in this book has a purpose and has a reason to be there, and builds upon the world or the characters or the inevitable kind of moments that are going to come up later. So if you've not yet got into Kristin Hannah, The Women is one of the best she's ever done. Night Road is also fantastic. So yeah, I would highly, highly recommend anything from Kristin Hannah, especially, as I said, The Women. So yeah, that's The Women by Kristin Hannah. So not to now come on like a kind of downward spiral saying that's probably my favourite book of the year, but Intermezzo by Sally Rooney was also fantastic and arguably one of my favourite books of the year. This might be like a top 3 for me, possibly. Intermezzo focuses simply on 2 brothers and their relationship with 3 women, I guess. One is focusing on a relationship with an older woman that he meets and their kind of dynamic of, well, you're an older woman, what does this actually mean? She's recently divorced, can it be serious with such a young man, that sort of thing. And then this person's older brother and his relationship with his current fling, swing, woman thing going on, and also his relationship with his ex-girlfriend, for whom he broke up with, I don't know if that's correct English, because of a difficulty they had in their relationship. And it's all that kind of dynamic there that's really, really interesting. Now, it doesn't sound mind-blowing, and it is really difficult to sell. People are like, oh, that sounds interesting. It doesn't. It really doesn't. But Sally Rooney's writing makes it interesting. Sally Rooney is one of the greatest British writers at the moment. It's absolutely fantastic. She's killing it with the way that she writes. She has some controversial choices when she writes. She doesn't put speech marks or anything like that in her writing. So it's very difficult to know when you're physically reading when people are speaking. Though you do start to pick it up. It starts to become natural and you start to forget that you don't actually need speech marks. So there we go. So it's Peter and Ivan. I've just seen their names on the back. I forgot their names. But Peter and Ivan, and they're different relationships with women. It's just fantastically written. At points there it was felt poetic. The start of every chapter feels almost like some sort of small poem and some sort of beautifully written book in itself, and that's why I loved it. It was just so gripping, so enthralling. She writes these characters so raw and pure, and yeah, it was really, really fantastic. People are Marmite on this book. I think part of the reason about her not writing her speech marks in is a bit of a difficulty for people. I think if you're not physically reading the book and you're not understanding what the difficulties is and how it is purely a human book, nothing big and grand is going on here, nothing happens at fast pace or anything like that. This is just small moments that happen in small human beings' lives, but it amounts to a very raw and fantastic book. And I absolutely loved it. This was absolutely fantastic. And also I'm just really intrigued by the front cover. Really, really impressive front cover. Again, I'm a sucker for front cover, which is a big long thing people have said don't be. So anyway, that's Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. Brilliant book. And last, but by no means least, the 10th book on this list, not the 10th worst book or the 10th best book or whatever, just a book in my 10th list, is Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinniman. Now, this was a bit of a viral sensation this year. Everybody who's into fantasy started to pick this up as their first lit RPG. Now, I am a role-playing game person. When I have a PC that sits just right to the right of you, left of me, I'm not quite sure which way YouTube's going to flip this around. Either way, I have one that sits just here. And I love an RPG. I love inventory. I love skills. I love leveling up. I love levels. All sorts of nerdy stuff about RPGs and the story and the lore and conversations and picking different areas, that sort of thing. And Dungeon Crawler Carl was my first lit RPG. So a lit RPG takes those elements, your inventory, your skills, your leveling up, all this sort of stuff, and puts them into a book form. So let me see if I can kind of show you what I mean by that. So as you're reading along, you will see elements where it says, congratulations, you've leveled up, you've earned your first achievements, these sort of things in the book like so, which I think was just really, really fun for me to read as a nerd. So the plot of Dungeon Crawler Carl is that Carl, our main hero, and the cat of his ex-girlfriend end up falling into this massive kind of dungeon that these aliens have exploded Earth or destroyed Earth to create, to then watch people in these dungeons as live TV entertainment. I've explained that really poorly, but I think you get the idea. Earth is kind of manipulated into these dungeons, and these aliens are now watching humans go through these levels as entertainment. That's it. I think that's basically it, so we need to understand. But it was just really good fun. So as I said, the RPG element pulled me in because I thought that's really cool. Love the kind of, I'm seeing achievements, I'm seeing levels, all this sort of stuff. But also, it's very funny. It's brilliantly funny. It's smartly funny. It's also quite dark funny. It's if you don't have a sense of humor or you struggle to get dark humor, you're going to struggle with sort of funny. But either way, it is thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyable. What also then took it onto another level for me, thinking, okay, it's funny and it's an RPG, that's good, that's fine for me, is there's another aspect that starts to come in. So as I discussed, there is this aliens watching humans sort of aspect. As it's all kind of broadcast, there are two elements that make it quite interesting. One, Similar to kind of Hunger Games, you can get kind of sponsors and they will sponsor you. And thus you become characters, you become kind of actors within this world. Whilst you're also trying to fend for your life, you're also trying to make yourself seem interesting and cool and desirable and this sort of thing to make all of that sponsorship come through. But also what you then have is Carl, this defiant, kind of grumpy, he's broken up with his ex-girlfriend, he's not particularly happy, doesn't approve of all this sort of stuff going on. And thus it creates this really, really interesting dynamic where Carl is rebelling and essentially going off and making sure that things aren't going quite as smoothly as these aliens want. So that created a really cool aspect, that rebellion aspect, similar to kind of Hunger Games and all these sort of things where you have that one person who may finally stop this thing that's been going on for a long time. I don't know. I will spoil it by telling you that the book does not finish in a way that finishes anything. You are expected to then continue reading other books in the series for him to continue leveling up and go further down into this dungeon levels or this sort of stuff. But it is great fun. Fantastic book for anybody who's got kind of a gaming head on them or anybody who's into something a bit lighter. Fantastic Christmas book. It's one of those good books you can sit down on Christmas Day and probably read and just pick up, and any other time of the year. It's just something festive at the moment because it's about to become December. Either way, that's Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Stinneman. One of my top 10 books of the year. So there you have it. They are my 10 best books of 2025. Now, 2025 I wouldn't say has been my best reading year. I've had a child which took up much more of my time and thus I've not been able to read quite as much. I wouldn't say I've read my favourite book. If I had to pick a book out of the best 10 years, I wouldn't say any of these books possibly featuring that. Maybe The Women comes close. But I've had a really fun year of reading. As I said, Dungeon Crawler Carl is one of the most pieces of fun I've ever had. How to Lose a Time War is something I never thought I would enjoy, but I did really, really enjoy. And I don't know if anybody who is going to be some sort of literature master is going to be in the comments and being like, none of these books are that well written, you're an idiot, how do you know books? I bloody enjoyed them. And I think that's what reading is very, very much about. And thus I always recommend books I think people will enjoy, because not everybody's out there to read the greatest piece of literature, to read something that perfects the English language or anything like that. These books are about to collapse on me. People are there to enjoy reading, and that's what these books are for me. So as always, let me know down in the comments below whether you have read any of them, whether you agree with them. List me your top 10 books of the year or top 5 books of the year, or just your favourite book of the year so far. I would possibly say The Women by Kristen Hanna is mine. Either way, if you're new here, subscribe. If you're old here, like and drop a comment down below. And I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching and goodbye.